So let's talk about resistance. If you're a professional who works with clients needing to make big changes, you've definitely seen it. And it can feel like hitting a brick wall, right? But what if resistance isn't what we think it is? In this explainer, we're going to flip the script. We're going to look at resistance not as defiance, but as a totally normal, totally human response to feeling threatened. And, the best way to start understanding our clients is by understanding ourselves.
Okay, let's just jump right in with a little self-reflection. I want you to think back to a time you were in a training or maybe a performance review, a moment when something you really believed in, your professional expertise, was challenged. How did that feel in your body? Did you lean in, all curious, or did you kind of find yourself arguing back, maybe deflecting a bit or just shutting down completely? Just hold on to that feeling. That's our starting point.
You know that reaction you just remembered? It has a name. In fact, there's a whole language for it. Psychoanalytic theory gives us this really precise vocabulary to understand these unconscious moves we all make when we feel a little anxious or threatened. And this isn't about slapping a label on someone. No, it's about getting smarter about human behavior, starting with our own.
So the key player in all of this is what's called the ego. You could almost think of it as the CEO of your mind. It's this part of you that's constantly juggling three things: your raw, primal drives, that's the id. Then you've got your inner rulebook, your conscience, the superego, and of course, the pressures of reality. I mean, talk about a high-pressure job. All that juggling creates anxiety. And that's where defense mechanisms come in. They're basically the ego's unconscious toolkit for just keeping that anxiety in check.
In this quote right here, wow, it marks the huge shift in thinking. This is from Anna Freud, Sigmund Freud's daughter. And she basically said, look, we can't see the unconscious id directly. It's unconscious. But what we can see is the ego. We can see its defense mechanisms playing out in how people act every single day. And that insight, it just makes this whole idea so practical and observable, not just for therapists, but for all of us.
All right, now things get even more interesting with the work of a researcher named George Vaillant. He looked at Anna Freud's list of defenses, and he didn't just see a random collection. He saw a pattern. He showed that these defenses actually exist on a kind of developmental ladder, a hierarchy that goes all the way from these really primitive reactions to very mature, adaptive ways of coping with life.
And here's what that ladder looks like. Down at the bottom, level 1, you've got defenses that can kind of break with reality. Level 2, immature defenses. You see these a lot in teenagers, or, let's be honest, in any adult who's under a ton of stress. Level 3 is a bit more sophisticated, but still kind of self-deceptive. And then, way up at the top, level 4, these are the mature ones, healthy, adaptive strategies like humor and sublimation. The key thing to remember is that any of us can slide down this ladder when we feel threatened, especially in a new, scary learning situation.
And this is not just some abstract theory. This is the real aha moment. Research actually shows a direct, evidence-based link here. When a learner is leaning on those level 2 immature defenses, it literally gets in the way of their ability to plan, to perform, and to reflect on their own learning. So the way we defend ourselves has a direct impact on our ability to grow.
So what does this actually look like in the real world? Let's make it super concrete. We're about to put these two things side by side, the immature versus the mature defenses, and see how they can either block or boost the learning process. Okay, let's start with just planning to learn. On the left, we have a classic level 2 defense, denial. This is the student who gets some really tough feedback and just says, nah, I'm fine, it's no big deal, but then does absolutely nothing to change. They're just avoiding the anxiety of the problem. Now look at the right, a level 4 defense, anticipation. This learner sees the challenge, feels the anxiety, but says, okay, this is going to be hard, so what's my plan? You can see how their entire journey is set on a completely different path from the very beginning. Now let's move to the performance phase, when you're actually in the thick of it. An immature defense like regression is super common. You see this when a totally capable professional gets back into a learning role and suddenly feels helpless. They'll say things like, just tell me what to do, just give me the answer. It's like a retreat to a safer, more dependent place. Now contrast that with sublimation. Here the learner takes that exact same anxious, frustrated energy and channels it. They turn it into fuel. It becomes passion, it becomes deep thinking, it becomes creative problem solving. Same energy, totally different result.
All right, now for a really tricky one. This is a defense that can be so hard to spot, especially in professional or academic circles. It's a level 3 or neurotic defense, and it's so easy to mistake it for real intellectual engagement. We're talking about intellectualization.
And being able to tell these two apart is a game changer. So intellectualization is when someone talks brilliantly about a really tough topic like trauma or poverty, but in a completely abstract, detached way. The problem is always out there. It's a really smart way to keep the anxiety of the topic far, far away. True engagement, on the other hand, is when a learner uses that same theory as a bridge to look inward, to reflect on their own practice, their own feelings, their own part in the system. One is a shield, the other is a tool for growth.
And this, right here, is the absolute pivot point of this whole explainer. Think about it. If this is how we, as capable resource professionals, can react when our ideas are challenged in a pretty low-stakes classroom, just imagine the profound anxiety our clients must feel. They're not just learning something new, they are often facing a mandate to change their entire lives. Their whole world might feel threatened.
So what do we actually do? This table is your practical toolkit. Instead of seeing defiance, we learn to recognize these defensive patterns as signals of anxiety. And we have to avoid confronting those defenses head-on. That just makes them stronger. Instead, our job is to build psychological safety, to create a space where those defenses just aren't as necessary. We remember that regression under pressure is a totally normal human thing. So we ditch the harsh feedback that just ramps up the anxiety, and we focus on building our clients' capacity to cope in healthier ways.
You know, when it all comes down to it, this is about shifting our entire perspective. It's about moving from being reactive to being interpretive. We're essentially learning how to read the resistance, not as a fight against us, but as a message about what's going on inside a person.
All right, let's wrap this up with the key takeaways. First, resistance is an ego strategy. It is not a moral failing. Second, we can actually see these defenses in people's behavior. And remember, our job isn't to diagnose anybody, it's just to use this lens to understand behavior with more compassion and more effectively. And finally, recognizing the anxiety underneath it all, that is always the first step toward helping someone and ourselves engage in a much more mature and productive way.
So I'm going to leave you with this one last question to carry with you into your work. If we stop seeing resistance as this thing we have to overcome, and we start seeing it as a form of communication, a message about fear or anxiety or feeling threatened, what is your client really, truly trying to tell you? And how might that change the way you listen?